You're still on, Nancy.
Yes, I know that. I heard that.
Father's Day. Yikes. It's a wonderful thing for those of us who little down on the amplification. Wonderful thing for some of us whose kids are mature and gotten over all the trauma of their childhood and going to give you a call or take you out to breakfast. Others of us, it's a very trying day. Some of us may have had children who have passed before us. Sickness and war. And some of us won't receive a phone call today because of our bad behavior as fathers or our children's bad behavior on their own right. But I think we have to remember our Father in heaven when He comes upon this day. He realizes that He gave His Son to die for His good behavior. And His Son now sits with Him on the throne for all of our salvations. Jesus, when He came to earth, liked weddings. It's evident in that that was His first miracle, to turn water into wine. And throughout the Scripture, He refers to weddings in His parables and in His teaching. We are in the 14th chapter of Luke, and the 7th verse goes like this. Jesus was invited to be a guest at a luncheon, and He notices that the guests that were also invited to this particular place were taking the best seats. When He noticed that how the guests picked the best places of honor at the table, He told them this parable. When someone is invited to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may be invited. So we have all been to some wonderful wedding somewhere along the line, and the tables are all set up, and normally the couple, they sit up here at the head table, and then the parents and people sit here, and then the rest of us are all lined up somewhere along the line. Well, what Jesus is saying is, it's not your place as one of the guests necessarily to join the parents at their table or the children being married at theirs. Know your place. When someone is invited you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may be invited. Now, as I was thinking of how we might best visualize this, I remembered this picture that I saw recently of the royal family. And you'll notice that the royal family is all lined up and seated in relationship to their importance. So we have the queen mother on one side and the father of the prince on the other, and on the other side we have the mother of the bride. And then it sort of goes along like that as we get to the different children that are in line to be kings and princes and dukes and whatever else they have over there. So, we can imagine that if the host who invited you both will come and say to you, give this person a seat. Now let's assume that somebody actually tried to photobomb this event. So they come springing along, bump, 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 stand up real quick. What do you imagine would happen? Well, they weren't invited into this picture. So, they will be very summarily escorted out of the place. And whatever effort they were trying to get for honor will certainly turn into humiliation. Then, the humiliated, you will have to take your least important place. Scripture goes on. Now, this is actually a parable. But when you are invited, take the lowest place so that when your host comes, he will say to you, friend, move up to a better place. Then you will be honored in the presence of the other guests. So now, you can imagine, we come and we're standing over here, we're just a lowly nobody, but maybe we knew her once or got her autograph, and somehow Megan, being the wonderful person she is, sees us over there and says, why don't you come over and you can stand just inside here. That would be a great honor. And, of course, we would all now be in the picture. But this is the principle that Jesus is teaching. For all of those who exalt themselves, they will be humbled, and those that humble themselves will be exalted. Now, between the 550 and 450 BC, you count down, not up, when you're talking about BC. So for about 100 years, the Israelites were taken away from Palestine, and they were brought to Babylon, which is Persia, and in exile. And while in exile, they were slaves. And the story that is about to unfold here is somewhat similar to the story of Joseph in Genesis. Well, actually, Bible scholars say they are tracking along almost exactly with one another. Well, how the story goes is the king of Persia, he's this very wealthy, ultimately powerful person. He's sovereign. Whatever he says is what is done. And he decides that he is going to have a wonderful festival for 7 days and display all of his gorgeous golden vases and plates and jewels and crowns and animals and everything else. He's just going to display all of his wealth. And as this great display of his wealth progresses, he's drinking a little bit of the spirits there. It says the high spirits, wine. And he gets a little high-spirited. And so finally, after he displays all that he has, he thinks, I have one more great thing to show everybody. And so, in this spirit of high, he orders his queen, Vashti, to appear before him in her crown and all her beauty. Now, I don't know exactly what all her beauty means, but whatever it means, Vashti got the message that she was supposed to show up in her crown and all her beauty, and said, I don't think so. Well, that got back to the king, and he, now with a hangover, is thinking, who is she to tell me that I don't think so? So he calls all of his wise advisors together, his grand vizier by the name of Haman, and he says, what are we to do? The queen, she didn't come when I called her. Well, they say, well, this is a real problem, king. If all the other women in the kingdom hear about this, whoa, they're all going to feel like they have the permission and the football to deny their husbands their This could end up in a terrible situation as the husbands get more and more frustrated and the kingdom, well, who knows, could fall apart. So, they decided they advised him to dump Vashti and get himself another queen. And as his head began to clear from his hangover, he said, well, why not? Good idea. So they went out and they gathered all the beautiful virgins in the kingdom, and they brought them in for the first episode of The Bachelor. And before they presented the king with all these gorgeous virgins, they had to spend 12 months in preparation. The first 6 months, they just oiled them down apparently all day long. These guys named eunuchs did this job. And then after the first 6 months, they spent the next 6 months working on their clothing and their gowns and their, it says literally, their makeup. So now they are ready to rock and roll. Well, amongst these beautiful virgins was a girl by the name of Hadassah, which really just means it's a very lowly, flowering myrtle plant. Well, she had a very wise counselor. Now, Hadassah was actually an orphan. She was from a very lowly Jewish family who had been exiled into Babylon, and both of her parents had died, and so as a result of that, her uncle adopted her. His name is Mordecai. And he's a very worldly wise guy. And he says, look, when they take you to the palace, two things. You don't want to tell them that you're Jewish, and you don't want them to know your name is Hadassah. Look, I use the name Esther. It means the star. And comes from the Persian Near Eastern goddess Istar. So it is that she doesn't tell them that she's a lowly, orphan Jewish girl, and she changes her name to Esther. Well, now Mordecai, who is in the place of her father, and since it's his Father's Day, we give him a little credit, he's really thinking about how do you win this bachelor contest, and he's at the city gates trying to figure all of this out, when he overhears, providentially, a couple of eunuchs scheming to kill the king. Oh. Well, that's how Esther gets the inside line on getting that final rose and the crown. He gets a message to her, and so it is that she tells the king, and they investigate, and it turns out to be true. Now, if you are a fan of the Game of Thrones, you will recognize these two characters. The big guy on the side here is the eunuch. And what we know about eunuchs is that they are taken from their families before puberty, because it's very important that the hormones don't get a chance to kick in. They are castrated, and then they are taken off to the king's palace, where they serve in several different capacities, but one of their primary roles is to watch over and care for the king's harem. Well, given this reality, it's not too hard for us to imagine that somebody in this position might want to scheme about cutting their butchering king up. And so it was that these two fellas were exposed and hung. Well, now Mordecai, having given the queen this information, the queen giving it to the king, she's now the queen. Well, this is great. And Mordecai has a rather proud father, sits at the city gates every day and listens to the scuttlebutt about what's going on with the kingdom. And as he is there, the queen's been crowned, and this situation kind of upsets Haman, the Grand Vizier, but he's still, okay, he's got this queen now to contend with, but he is, in his mind, the number one guy in the king's kingdom. And he thinks as the number one guy in the king's kingdom, everybody else in the kingdom should stand when he passes by and bow down. Well, as he leaves the city gate, he passes Mordecai, and Mordecai, lo and behold, doesn't get out of his chair. Oh, Haman just thinks this is atrocious, and if everybody else sees that Mordecai can somehow shine him on, just like Vashti shined on the king, this could spread and hurt his great honor and his great position in the kingdom. So he goes to the king, and he says, "Look, king, there is this Israeli people, and they have this religious cult called Judaism, and part of this cult is that they should disobey the king in favor of their ultimate king." Oh, and again, the king's having a hangover at this point, and it seems like, oh, that's not good. So what do? Well, says Haman, I have a plan. And this is my plan, that you should exterminate all of the Jews in your kingdom. And in fact, I love the king so much, and I care to protect his reputation so much, I'll pay for it. Oh, well, okay. The king thought that wasn't too bad a plan. And of course, this information gets back to Mordecai. He's sitting at the gate. He hears the plan. He's thinking, oh, and he throws ashes on his head, and he tears his clothes. I know about this because my wife's grandmother, she's from Syria, and when things went wrong in the household, she'd pull out her hair and rip her clothes. That's the kind of sign of grief that these Middle Eastern people have. And so it is that Mordecai is in peril. What to do? Oh, I know what to do. I'll get a message to my adopted daughter and ask her to somehow work this thing out. The message gets to Esther, who is now the queen. But for whatever reason, the king has kind of lost interest in Esther. He hasn't called her up for 30 days, and that's a sign that maybe she's on the outs in terms of the harem. And so she tells her uncle, or sends a message back to her uncle, look, this is what I want you to do. I want you to get all the Jewish people together and fast for 3 full days and pray that somehow this thing will work out. And then at the conclusion of that request, we see some of the most famous words that we have in the Bible. They show up in all kinds of different literary commentaries, and that is, if I perish, after you guys fast and pray, if I perish, I perish. And it was, in fact, if you went to see the king and you weren't called, you perish. The king isn't calling her. She needs to see the king and make a request, and she's really putting her whole life on the line at this point in time. So what it says is she gets herself all dressed up. Remember, she knows how to do makeup now. She gets herself all dressed up, gets herself all perfect, and she kind of walks around outside of the door of the king's throne room. Well, the king, he's doing his business. Things are, it's boring after a while being a king. Everybody's bowing and whatever. Okay. And he sees her out there. Well, he's maybe a king, but he's still a man. And he thinks, whoa, that is my gorgeous queen. And he calls her in, and you can't really make this stuff up. He calls her in, and what she's to do is to bow down, prostrate herself, humble herself before him, and then if he extends his golden rod, she's to touch him. Well, that in fact is what took place. And so he says, look, I think you're like the most gorgeous thing on the planet. I love you. You're a wonderful thing. You've obviously got some request. I'll tell you what, I'll give you up to half my kingdom. Whoa, that sounds pretty good. But this woman is very wise. She's a very clever lady. And she doesn't say, oh yeah, I'd like you to kill Haman because he's trying to kill us. No. She says, look, if it would be okay with the king, very humbly, she understands. She doesn't try to jump to the front first. No, she starts at the bottom and lets the king raise her up. That's the whole meaning of the parable that we just read that Jesus gave us about the wedding. And so she says, look, what I really would like to do is I'd like to create a beautiful banquet for you and your grand vizier Haman. Oh, the king thought that's a great idea. Are we going to have wine there? Yes, we're going to have wine. And so it is that he calls Haman in, and they have this wonderful banquet that the queen has prepared for them, and they're all excited, and they're again in very high spirits. And so the king says, well, look, I know this couldn't be your real request. Go ahead and ask whatever you want, up to half my kingdom. And she says, oh, okay, well, no, I'll tell you what I'd really like to do is prepare another banquet for you tomorrow. So it is that he said, well, man, how can I say no to that? She touched the golden rod, and off they went. Well, that night, the king is having a hard time sleeping. And again, we look at this from a providential perspective. He's having a hard time sleeping, so he says to his slaves, bring in some of the chronicles of my great adventures. I'd like to read them. So he brings them in, and he's reading them, and in the process, he reads about how these two eunuchs were trying to kill him, and how somehow his queen was informed by this guy Mordecai, because Esther gave him credit for this, Mordecai to fend off these assassins. Well, so it is that Esther approaches the scepter. What will you do? What's your request? Up to half my kingdom. She then says, look, I'd be happy. And they're all in high spirits. But when Mordecai saw the king's gate, this is what happened. So the king calls in Haman the next day. And he says to Haman, he says, man, there is somebody in my kingdom who I really want to honor. And what did Haman think?
Me, yeah.
It's me! Yeah! And so, since it is him, the king says, well, what would you think we should do with this guy? Well, Haman has this wonderful plan. I think we ought to put him on your donkey, and we ought to take him out into the streets, and we ought to put your cloak on him, and your crown on him, and your signet in his hand, and parade him around. Well, the king says, that sounds great. I want you to do that for Mordecai. Well, this was a real problem for the poor guy, because you see, Haman had already decided that what Mordecai needed was to be hung. Because another time he's walking out, Mordecai doesn't get up, he goes home, he talks to his wife, and she tells him, look, this Mordecai guy, you got to do something about it. Here's what you can do. You need to build a pole. Now, this is in different translations. The King James says gallows, but the real word is pole, and it's really a gallows pole, and a gallows pole is a cross. She says, look, you need to build a gallows pole 80 feet high in the air, and then you need to ask the king to let you impale Mordecai on it. So Mordecai goes to the king thinking this is what he's going to do, and the king tells him, look, no, I want you to honor Mordecai in this incredible way, and this just throws Mordecai into a state of who knows what. So here he is, leading Mordecai on the king's mount, in the king's gown, with the king's crown, and holding the signet, through the town, pointing to Mordecai, saying, honor this man. And oh, when he's all done, he goes home and he is so humiliated. It says he covers his face. I don't know if any of you have been there. I've been there. You do something so stupid and so outside of God's will, and in front of your whole world, and you can't stand to face anybody. I remember one time hiding in my room, and it had a window that faced the street, and I made sure I stayed below the window the whole time. That's Mordecai. He is humiliated by this situation. But in his humiliation, a servant or a messenger comes from the palace and says, "Hey, it's time for that second banquet." Oh, he gets up and he goes. Well, this is where the queen lays it all out. As Mordecai's in there, they've all had a few glasses of wine. She turns to Mordecai and tells everybody, "You know what this man wants to do? He wants to exterminate me, Mordecai, who you just honored, and all your people." And of course, the king does what kings do and declares that Mordecai, in fact, is the one that's going to end up on the gallows pole, and that all of his wealth, along with his 10 sons, by the way, all of his wealth is going to be disseminated amongst the Jews. Now, this particular, all of Haman's wealth is going to be amongst the Jews. Now, this is an example of, for all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all of those who humble themselves will be exalted. By the way, the Jewish people celebrate this story every year in the celebration of Purim. And one of the things that they do at Purim, I remember learning this from a Jewish friend early on, is they create these little pastries with prune paste inside, or prune jam inside, and they call them Haman's ears. And as part of this, they play little games to mock old Haman. And Haman, even to this day, unfortunately, is suffering from humiliation from his stupidity. Now, again, we get back to the principle that we are trying to understand. In Esther, and in the wedding seating parable that we started out with, the word is teaching us a foot-washing culture of humility that is required, and I don't think many of us really have grasped this, and I may have grasped it. I'm not sure. I'm certainly not ready to accept it in its entirety. But a foot-watching culture of humility required to participate in the economy of the kingdom of God. In other words, this is the way the kingdom of God is set up. It's not set up like our economy where everybody's trying to get more. No, it's set up to where everybody's trying to give away more and be less. As John the Baptist said, "I must become less and you must become more." Our egos, our desires, our hope for honors, they must all be subservient to the honor and glory that God has to give. Now, this word humility in Greek is defined this way. It is an inside out. In other words, it comes from inside. It's not something you can put on. You can't, put on all kinds of poor clothes and walk around about how humble you are. Oh, look at poor me. No, that's not humility. It's something that comes from the heart. It's inside. It's around the heart, it says in the Greek. It's from the inside out virtue produced by comparing oneself to the Lord rather than to others. As I saw this video that we had of this father, I thought, man, I wasn't that good. Wish I was. But now I not only have to compare myself to this guy here, but I have to compare myself to a man who came here and gave everything so that we could become children of God. So that we could have a Father in heaven. So So in humility, our self-esteem isn't grounded in self-exaltation, self-determination, and self-inflation, but living in complete childlike dependency on our Lord Jesus Christ. Now, what does that mean? I saw recently on one of the evening news shows, there was this burning building, and there was a child in the third-story window, and the father was down below and telling the child to jump, saying, "I'll catch you, I'll save you." But man, the child, he's 30, 35 feet up, and what does it take for you to jump? It takes childlike dependence. It takes childlike trust. That's my father. And as children, we are totally dependent. I mean, a 4-year-old may think he's hot stuff, but in reality, when it comes time for dinner, where does he go? When he pees in his bed, where does he go? When, he can't find his socks, where does he go? He's totally dependent, and he knows that. He wants to become independent, but that's not happening yet. So we need this childlike independence or humility if we're going to somehow be able to make all of this work. Jesus said it this way, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like a little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." Please, dear people, I know that you all say, "Oh, well, I said the sinner's prayer, and maybe I've been baptized, and who knows, maybe you've been confirmed." But that is not what Jesus said. It's good. It purifies you and puts you into a position to grow. But somehow we all have to do this. Become like little children, willing to jump out of that building into our Father's arms, trusting that He can and will catch us, that He has the power and the ability to do what we need Him to do. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of a child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. This is perplexing. But when I looked up, if I perish, I perish, I Googled it. You know what came up? If I die before I wake. Jesus doesn't expect us to be able to take that leap. There's dying grace for dying time. And what you're doing here today and every day until you have to take that leap from mortality into immortality and hopefully gracefully land in your Father's arms. He's giving us every day instruction, trials. Some of the stuff that we've done turns out bad. Some of it turns out good. Some of it's humiliating. Some of us gives us hope. But the truth is, we all have hope. We all have hope that we can, by some gracious act of God, through His Son Jesus, kneel down at night and pray. Pray with me. Now I lay me down to sleep. Pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I die before I wake, if I perish, pray the Lord my soul to take. There's hope. But there's only hope if we're willing to take that childlike perspective and allow God to bring us into His kingdom. There's only hope if we're willing to take that leap of faith that Kierkegaard wrote so amazingly about. From our own abilities to God's gracious gifts. It's Father's Day. And some of us, and I'm going to put myself in this category, we're the best. preoccupied with getting my education, making a living, doing whatever. I didn't have time all the time. And my son suffered for it. But I have hope. I have hope that the Son of God has given me, that somehow I can be purified and somehow I can learn to be the child of God that will be welcomed into the kingdom of heaven. So now I lay me down to sleep. And these words, I mean, it's like, wow, this is kiddie. No, this is not kiddie stuff. This is not some kiddie stuff. This is, if I perish, I perish. Pray the Lord, and that Lord is capitalized. That is the one that is going to take control of your life, take control of your heart and your soul, and make it possible for you to be this humble, caring, loving servant. Pray the Lord my soul to keep, if I die. And you will. Pray the Lord. And I pray the Lord, our souls today. God bless you all. We're here to pray with you if you would care for that. And fathers may be feeling bad now. I don't know. I didn't mean to do that. I feel bad. So I thought I'd make you feel bad. But the truth is, we have hope. And so it is. We're here to pray for you. And you can maybe pray for us. But in the meantime, pray for each other, love each other, care for each other. Wash each other's feet. In the name of Jesus, amen.